Hello, everyone. I'm Kamraun.
And I'm Billy. Welcome to the HorseFrog podcast, home of your two favorite professional digressors.
Today, we will be discussing Book 2, Chapter 9 of Deadhouse Gates, a novel in the Malazan Book of the Fallen. This is part 2 of our coverage of this chapter.
This podcast series is intended to be a companion to reading or listening to the books set in the Malazan universe. It's not a book review, and it's most definitely not intended to be a replacement to reading the books. Know that Kamraun and I know that this series is the best fantasy story ever written, and we're approaching it from a purely fanboy point of view, and there's not going to be much literary critique. We will simply marvel at Erikson's writings.
Nice. We will be covering the events of the books in a linear fashion. There will be spoilers for those that have not read the books. We'll try not to spoil anything prior to us covering that portion of the respective book.
And a quick warning, today's episode contains some scenes of sorceress violence, coruscating, and non-coruscating, so today's episode is probably not recommended for kids.
Our show is listener supported. If you would like to support us, we would really appreciate it. You can do so by visiting our Patreon link on our website at HorseFrogProductions.com. Currently, we are posting ad-free episodes on Patreon weekly.
Also, we would really like to hear from you, so send any feedback or comments to contact@horsefrogproductions.com.
All right, Chapter 9, Part 2. We pick up the chapter with Kalam, Minala, and Keneb. Keneb shook his head and said, Kalam, who rode with Whiskey Jack across Raraku. It was dusk, and Kalam had just awakened from a long, deep sleep. His first hour awake was never a pleasant one. Aching joints, old wounds, his years always caught up with him while he slept. Selv had brewed a strong tea. She poured Kalam a cup. You know, I'm getting to this point now where it takes my body a while to get moving in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
I had a coworker who was a professional bull rider in his youth, and he's about 44 now. And he said it takes him about 2 hours every day before he gets to move around without any pain.
Wow. 2 hours, that's brutal. It's okay, it's scriptural. There's precedent for this. There's a verse that talks about groaning in these bodies. But yeah, I think we've talked about our mutual friend, too, that I used to work for that had hurt himself so much. And he's only he's about your age, a little bit younger. And he's broken his shoulder blade, had both knees replaced. He bent his arm backwards, falling off a wall at the elbow. Bent your elbow the way it's not supposed to bend. It didn't go all the way.
Just hyperextended a little bit.
Yeah. But it's oh my good gracious, this guy, if he lives to be 50 or 60, I can imagine what his waking up is like.
The time will take its toll on all of us, I guess. It's the mileage.
It is.
Minala said, I would never have believed that one man could kill 8, all within minutes. She's still going on about that.
That's worth going on about, though.
Yeah. Keneb said, Kalam was recruited into the Claw. That's rare. They usually take children, train them. Kalam grunted, Train? Indoctrination. He looked up at Minala and continued, Attacking a group of warriors isn't as impossible as you think. For the lone attacker, there's no one else to make the first move. 8, 10 men, well, they figure they should just all close in and hack me down. Only, who goes first? They all pause. They all look for an opening. It's my job to keep moving, make sure every opening is closed before they can react. Mind you, a good veteran squad knows how to work together. Minala said, Then you were lucky they didn't. Kalam agreed. I was lucky. The older boy, Kessin, said, Can you teach me how to fight like that, sir? Man, he's adding a sir on there.
Yes, he is. Must be from the South.
Kalam grunted. I expect your father has a better life in mind for you, lad. Fighting is for people who fail at everything else. You know, I had this highlighted. That sounds a lot like what Whiskey Jack told Ganois in the prologue of Guards of the Moon, doesn't it?
Very much. Very much so. And I too had this highlighted. But it's very similar. It's almost the exact same thing. Well, it's the same age group, though.
Mm-hmm.
I understand where these young kids coming from. They've just survived a raiding party, and they've seen this country blow up around them all of a sudden. So these kids, man, he wants to learn how to fight because he's out here fighting now, even though he hasn't had to fight yet. But, I think that's why he's saying that. I would.
Yeah.
I think this is a natural reaction.
They're obviously super impressed.
Yes. People, dude, come on.
Yeah. Keneb said, But fighting isn't the same as soldiering.
Mm-hmm.
Kalam said, That's a fact, sensing that he'd somehow stung Keneb's pride. He continued, Soldiers are worth respect, and it's true that sometimes fighting's required. Soldiering means standing firm when that time comes. So, lad, if you still want to learn how to fight, learn how to soldier first. Minala said, In other words, listen to your father, and gave Kalam a quick, wry smile. Selv rose and led the boys off to finish breaking camp. As soon as they were out of earshot, Kenneb said, Aaron's what, 3 months away? Hood's breath. There has to be a Malazan-held city or fortification that's closer than that, Corporal. Kalam said, all the news I've heard has been bad. Everything south of here is tribal lands, all the way to the river Vathar. Ubarid's close to the river, but I'd guess it's been taken by Shaikh's Apocalypse, too valuable a port to leave unsecured. Secondly, I would think most of the tribes between here and Aaron have set off to join Chemist Rello. Kenneb looked startled. He asked, Rello? Kalam frowned and said, the bandits spoke of him as being southeast of here. Kenneb said, more east than south. Rello is chasing Fist Coltane and the 7th Army. He's probably wiped them out by now, but even so, his forces are east of the Sakala River, and that's the territory he's been charged to hold. Kalam said, you know much more of this than I. Minala said, we had Tithanzi servants, loyal. Kenneb added, they paid for that with their lives. Kalam asked, then is there an army of the Apocalypse south of here? Kenneb nodded and said, aye, preparing to march on Aaron. Kalam said, tell me, Captain, you ever heard the word Gistel? Kenneb said, no, not 7 cities. Why? Kalam explained, the bandits spoke of a Gistel inside Aaron, as if it was a shaved knuckle. Quick reminder, that's Malazan shorthand for the equivalent of a trump card. Kalam was silent for a moment, then sighed. Who commands this army? Kenneb said, that bastard Corbolo Dom. Kalam's eyes narrowed. He said, but he's a Fist. Kenneb cut in. Was, till he married a local woman who just happened to be the daughter of Halaf's last holy protector. He's turned renegade, had to execute half his own legion who refused to step across with him. The other half divested the imperial uniform, proclaimed themselves a mercenary company, and took on Corbolo's contract. It was that company that hit us in Orbal. Call themselves the Whirlwind Legion or something like that. Kenneb rose and kicked at the fire, scattering the last embers. He went on. They rode in like allies. We didn't suspect a thing. Kalam sensed there was more to the tale. He muttered, I remember Corbolo. Kenneb said, thought you might. He was Whiskey Jack's replacement, wasn't he? Kalam said, for a time, after Raraku. A superb tactician, but a little too bloodthirsty for my taste. For Lysine, too, which was why she holed him in Halaf. Too bloodthirsty for Lysine. That's interesting, given she formed the Claw.
In a strange way, yes, but the Claw was always more subtle. Aren't they, like political assassinations and whatnot?
I would say surgical.
Surgical, okay.
Yeah, but bloodthirsty, the methodology.
They might need to, I understand the need to make, I say this, I understand in a sense the need to make a gruesome display to get your point across. But I think she's more I think you're right. I think she's more surgical in what she does. It may be bloody, but I think, because even if Kalam, if even he says it's too bloody for his taste, that means that he learned that maybe from Lysine. She may like straight out not killing, but she may not like torture and just sadistic stuff. I think Kabalo's kind of sadistic, isn't he?
I don't know.
I'm not sure if I remember that. I just remember, I think that's where I guess this is where I kind of delineate between necessity and ugliness versus bloodthirsty, which is you have to do something for a reason, but you take great pleasure in doing it when it's really nasty business. Versus I do the nasty business because I believe in the reasons behind the nasty business. Versus I love the nasty business for the nasty business.
I always got the impression that the Claw were more sociopathic than anything.
Yeah, well, the ones we know.
Yeah.
Well, they have to be if you're going to be a killer, because most killers are kind of sociopathic. I mean, you got to be sociopathic. You got to have that kind of disconnect.
Yeah.
I say that. I'm assuming this is what Hollywood has taught me. I mean, speaking of Hollywood, have you seen the Fincher movie? Has that come out yet? The Killer with Fassbender?
I haven't heard of this movie.
You haven't heard of this movie? Oh my word!
What's it about?
It's about a hitman job gone wrong. Fassbender, David Fincher.
Okay.
It's made for Netflix, and I think it comes out like it either came out the other day or it's about to be coming out real quick on Netflix. Called The Killer.
Okay.
So we must watch this because I love Michael Fassbender.
What's the last movie he did?
Oh my word, I'm not sure.
Not Fassbender, but Fincher. Do you recall?
I think it was Mank, and I think it was for Netflix. He's been doing things for Netflix lately, ever since House of Cards. So The Killer has got an 85 on Rotten Tomatoes, and it came out the 10th, so it should be on Netflix now. And this is
it just came out on Friday.
It just came out Friday.
Okay.
So we have something to look forward to.
A good score. Okay.
Yeah.
Nice.
Because the ad I saw for him, he's real cold. I'm like, oh, this is going to be real fun.
Okay.
It's like, this is going to be great, dude.
All right.
I love hitman movies. I'm sorry. I love sociopathic hitman movies. It goes back to the Charles Bronson, The Mechanic. As a kid, that's the first hitman movie I ever saw. My dad let me watch it with him. And the new one is great with Statham because I love Jason Statham. But it's got kind of more of the happy ending versus the original Mechanic. And I like those oblique movies. And so this has that idea. This is a very bleak look for a hitman movie. It's like, oh.
Did you ever watch The Gray Man on Netflix?
No, I did not. Was that good? That's Liam Neeson, right?
No, it's you're thinking of The Gray. The Gray Man is an adaptation of a book about this faceless gray man that works for the CIA.
Oh.
It has Ryan Gosling as the main character.
Oh.
The brothers that did the Avengers movies.
Ooh, Russos.
The Russos, I think they directed it.
Oh.
They either produced it or directed it or both.
Okay.
But it's quite high budget. Pretty decent movie, actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to do
books
one
are
more
supposed to
movie
be really
aside.
good.
I'll do one more movie aside. Have you seen the trailer for Rebel Moon by Zack Snyder?
No.
I just saw my first trailer. We went to dinner this evening or late lunch and saw it at Chili's. We went to Chili's. They got the screens playing there. So we saw it. I was like, whoa, that looks pretty cool.
Well, I know you love Zack Snyder.
I've got a, yeah, I have a huge love for that guy. And despite no matter what people think, I love Snyder. I'm unashamed of that.
Yeah. All right. Moving along. Kenneth laughed and said, and promoted Dujek instead, who's now been outlawed. That was in response to Corpolo Dom taking Whiskey Jack's spot.
Yes.
After Raraku.
Nice. Nice one, sir.
Kalam rose and said, now there's an injustice I'll tell you about someday. We should get going. Those raiders may have friends nearby. He felt Minala's eyes on him as he readied his horse and was not a little disturbed. He thought, husband dead only 24 hours ago, an anchor cut away. Kalam was a stranger who'd as much as taken charge despite being outranked by her brother-in-law. She must have thought for the first time in a long time that they stood a chance of surviving with him along. It was not a responsibility he welcomed. He thought, still, I've always appreciated capable women. Only an interest this soon after her husband's death is like a flower on a dead stalk, attractive but not for long. Minala was capable, but if he let her, her own needs would end up undermining that capability. He thought, not good for her. And besides, if I led this one on, she'd stop being what attracted me to her in the first place. Best to leave well alone. Best to stay remote. Behind him, Minala said, Corporal Kalam. He turned and asked, what? Minala said, those women. I think we should bury them. Kalam hesitated, then resumed checking his horse's girth strap. He grunted, no time. Worry about the living, not the dead. Her voice hardened. She said, I am. There are 2 young boys who need to be reminded about respect. He turned to her and said, not now. Respect won't help them if they're dead, or worse. See that everyone else is ready to ride, then get to your horse. She paled and said, Captain gives the orders. Kalam said, he's got a busted head and keeps thinking this is a picnic. Watch the times he comes round. His eyes fill with fear. And here you go wanting to add yet another burden on the man. Even the slightest nudge might make him retreat into his head for good. And then what use is he? To anyone. She snapped, fine, and whirled away. Who do you think was right here between her and him?
I believe that he is right. She has a point that is very true. We don't want to be disrespectful, but these kids right now, we need to learn about staying alive because you can't protect anything if you're dead. So it only does good to save these boys, get them out of here. It is a bad thing. Explain to them on the way why we don't normally leave women. Explain to them why we don't leave comrades not buried normally, but these are circumstances we don't have an option. You just explain it. Don't have an option.
Yeah, explain why you're leaving them there. Yeah,
yes.
I agree with you. Kalam watched her stalk off. Selv and Keneb stood by their horses, too far away to have heard anything, but close enough to know that dark waters had been stirred between Minala and Kalam. A moment later, the children rode into view on a single horse, the 7-year-old in front and sitting tall with his younger brother's arms wrapped around him. Both looked older than their years. Kalam thought, respect for life, sure. The other lesson is just how cheap that life can become. Maybe the former comes from the latter, in which case they're well on their way as it is. With a cold tone, Minala said, ready. Kalam swung into the saddle. He scanned the growing darkness. He thought, stay close, Apt. Only not too close. They rode out of the riverbed and onto the grassy Odon with Kalam in the lead. Luckily, Apt was shy. We are taken to the Salanda. The rogue wave took them from the port side, a thick, sludgy wall that seemed to leap over the railing, crashing down on the deck like a landslide of mud. The water drained from the silts within seconds, leaving Felicin and the others on the main deck knee-deep in the foul-smelling muck. The pyramid of heads was a shapeless mound. That's nasty. I bet that mud stinks.
Oh, yeah, it's got to stink, especially with what we're about to find out.
Mm-hmm. Crawling, Heberick reached Felicin, his face smeared in dull ochre. He gasped, "This silt!" and paused to spit more from his mouth. He exclaimed, "Look at what's in it!" Almost too miserable to respond, Felicin reached down and scooped up a handful. She said, "It's full of seeds and rotting plants." Heberick said, "Aye, grass seeds and rotting grasses. Don't you understand, lass? That's not sea bottom down there. It's prairie, inundated. This warren's flooded. Recently."
So I'm assuming that all this rotting material down there creates nasty smelling sludge.
Yeah.
That'd be nasty.
I recently did this event where we went to this park and we were out by this creek, and it was kind of like a boot camp type thing. They had us rolling around in the mud by the creek. God, that stank. Similar type scenario, right? It's runoff, the same kind of stuff you would expect that would be in the bottom of this.
Yes.
Just plant, vegetation, runoff, that kind of stuff. Nasty.
Yeah, it is nasty.
Felicin grunted, unwilling to share in his excitement. She asked, "That's a surprise? Can't sail a ship on prairie, can you?" Heberick's eyes narrowed and he said, "You got something there, Felicin." The silt around her shins felt strange, crawling, restless. Ignoring Heberick, she clambered her way toward the stern castle. The wave had not gone that high. Gessler and Stormy were both at the steering oar. All four hands needed to maintain a course. Culp was near them, waiting to relieve the first man whose strength gave out. And he'd been waiting long enough for it to be obvious that Gessler and Stormy were locked in a battle of pride, neither one wanting to surrender before the other. Their bared grins confirmed it for Felicin. She thought, idiots. They'll both collapse at once, leaving the mage to handle the steering oar by himself. Man, they're definitely a stubborn lot.
Oh, my word. This reminds you of anyone? I think about Guardians of the Moon when Fid and them were doing that staring contest. I forget which bridge burner he's in there, but they're in that room in Pale. And
yes,
there's some staring going on there, but it's the same kind of thing. Is it the games that soldiers play, I guess, to kill the time, pass the time? Because that's 9/10 of the job of being a soldier is killing time.
Right. And Fiddler comes up with these crazy games just to pass the time.
Yeah, these two, I love these guys. I just love these guys. Stormy and Gessler. I think they're my favorite non-bridge burners, humans.
Well, I mean, we can't really talk about them yet.
I'm just saying over the bridge burners we know. It's like the non-bridge burners.
At this point.
Yes, at this point.
The sky continued to convulse over them, lashing lightning in all directions. The surface of the sea resisted the shrieking wind, the silt-heavy water lifting in turgid swells that seemed reluctant to go anywhere. The headless oarsmen continued their ceaseless rowing, though a dozen oars had snapped, the splintered shafts keeping time with those that still pushed water. The drum beat on, answering the thunder overhead with its measured, impervious patience. She reached the steps and climbed clear of the mud, then stopped in surprise. The silt fled her skin as if alive, poured down from her legs to rejoin the quaking pool that covered the main deck. Crouched near the mainmast, Heberick yelled in sudden alarm, eyes on the mud surrounding him as its shivering increased. He yelled, "There's something in it!" Truth shouted, "Come this way!" from the forecastle steps, reaching out with one hand. Bodden anchored Truth with a single-handed grip on the lad's other arm. Truth shouted, "Quick, something's coming out!" Felicin climbed another step higher. The mud was transmogrifying, coalescing into the shapes of figures. Flint blades appeared, some gray, some the deep red of chalcedony. Bedraggled fur slowly sprouted, riding broad, bony shoulders. Bone helmets gleamed polished gold and brown, the skulls of beasts that Felicin could not imagine existing anywhere. Long ropes of filthy hair were now visible, mostly black or brown. The mud did not so much fall away as change. These creatures were one with the clay. Culp shouted, "To land, I mass!" from where he stood, clinging to the mizzenmast. He shouted, "Logros to land!" They numbered 6. All wore furs except one, who was smaller than the others and last to appear. It was bedecked in the oily, ragged feathers of colorful birds, and its long hair was iron gray, streaked with red. Shell, antler, and bone jewelry hung from its rotting hide skin, but it appeared to carry no weapons. Their faces were withered, the bones underneath close to the surface and robust. The sockets of their eyes were black pits. The wiry remnants of beards remained, except on the silver-haired one, who now straightened and faced Culp. A female voice said, "Stand aside, servant of the Chained One. We have come for our kin, and for the Tist Edur." The language was Malazan. Another Talani mass turned to the silver-haired one. It was by far the biggest of the group. The fur humped over its shoulders came from some kind of bear. The hairs were silver-tipped. In a bored tone, it said, "Mortal worshippers are a bane themselves. We should kill them as well." The other one said, "We shall, but our quarry comes first." Culp shakily said, "There are no kin of yours here, and the Tist Edur are dead. Go see for yourself, in the captain's cabin." The female Talani mass cocked her head. 2 of her companions strode toward the hatch. She then swung about and stared at Heberick, who stood by the forecastle railing. She said, "Call down the mage linked to you. He is a wound, and he spreads. This must be stopped. More, I tell your god that such games place him in great peril. We shall not brook such damage to the Warrens." Felicin laughed, the sound tinged with hysteria. As one, the Talani mass looked at her. Felicin flinched from those lifeless gazes, then drew a breath to steady herself. She said, "You may be immortal and powerful enough to threaten the boar god, but you haven't got one thing right yet." The female said, "Explain." Felicin met the gaze of the female and said, "Ask someone who cares." Surprised that she neither flinched nor broke away, Heberick said, "I am no longer a priest of Fener. If the boar god is here among us, then I am not aware of it, nor do I much care. The sorcerer riding this storm pursues us, seeking to destroy us. I know not why." So, are you taking this to think that this sorcerer is somehow linked to Fener?
I don't know, because we've had mention of the Chained One. Who was she speaking to? Culp?
She was talking to Culp.
Huh.
Yes, it's a little bit confusing because she's turning to Heberick and saying, "Call that mage down that is linked to you." And
yes,
what other linkage could there be? Unless alternately the other Warren in Heberick is Odotarl, and because this mage somehow is driven mad by Odotarl from the mines, like, do you think they're referring to that linkage?
That's the only thing that would make any sense to me of their linkage, unless this guy, this wizard, is another Fener worshiper. But they've not mentioned any such thing. And if it was important, I think it would have been mentioned as such. So I think maybe more what you said, like maybe tied to the madness of since it's about to be said here about Odotarl madness. We've talked about it multiple times with wizards in proximity to it for long periods go mad. So maybe that linkage is through the fact that he is a Warren himself of Odotarl. Because why would there be 2 different things going on there with him?
Yeah, I think that's probably more along the lines of what's going on here.
Yeah, I think so.
But yeah, that mention of the Chained One, that's interesting.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I could see that if he said it to Heberick. Is that who he's talking to? But to me, it sounds like he's talking to Culp.
She was talking to Culp, or he, whichever one.
Right.
See.
It was
talking to Culp. Yes. But the Chained One, we really haven't heard much about the Chained One yet.
No, yet.
Mm-hmm.
Even though he's all over the books, even though what's funny, he's there.
Yeah.
I didn't realize he was there. You know what I'm saying? It's like I don't realize he's there, but he's there. That's cool.
The female said, "He is the madness of Odotarl." She's talking about that mage that's up in the sky.
Yes.
The 2 Imass sent to the cabin now returned. Though no words were spoken aloud, the female nodded. She said, "They are dead then, and our kin have departed. We must continue the hunt." She swung her gaze back to Heberick. "I would lay hands upon you." Felicin barked another laugh and said, "That'll make him complete." Culp growled, "Shut up, girl," and pushed past to descend to the main deck. He said, "We're not servants of the Chained One. Hood's breath, what is the Chained One? Never mind. I don't even want to know. We're on the ship by accident, not design." The female said, "We did not anticipate this warren would be flooded." Culp frowned and muttered, "It said you can cross oceans." Felicien could see Culp was having trouble following the Talan Imas's statements. So was she. The female said, "We can cross bodies of water, but we can only find our shapes on land." Now, question for you. Do you think they travel as mud along the bottom of the body of water?
I thought so, but I'm going to change that because the reveal that this was a prairie, they're still over land. It's going to drain eventually, I would assume. So would the waters recede and this be land again? So how are they able to, are they able to always reform on a ship? I don't know. That doesn't count as land. She didn't say I could reform on a ship.
I think what I was asking is when they're crossing water, do you think they're traveling as mud on the bottom? Or are they floating on the water? Like, what do you think is happening there?
I just thought that they could only travel, like, as I assumed, about a man-sized, a person-shaped or sized cloud of dust over the surface of the water. But I'm thinking that in here, I kind of felt in this whole scene that comes in how they came to manifest here, out of the mud is what it looked like. But it makes me think that when she says we can only find our shapes on land. So I don't think ships count as land is what I'm getting at. I think it's because this is technically supposed to be land. It's just flooded. We're kind of on land in a weird way. Is this a violation of a rule? I got no idea. I don't know why I thought about that like that, but I'm just more confused.
Previously, I always pictured when they went into the water that they were kind of just floating on top of the water. Like if you had a bunch of powder that you poured in like on top of a glass and it just kind of floats on top. But the way they assembled here on this read through, they were mud and then they coagulated into beings. I guess that made me think maybe it's more of a mud when they're in the water and they just kind of float along the bottom or like move along the bottom.
And I could see that being the case also, but it's like, I'm curious because because we always see the dust. Well, in Gardens of the Moon, we know that he can sense the dust around the horse's ankles. When Tool is following Talk or somebody in the city, I forgot when, not Talk, but Lorne. When he gets close, he's close, but he's just not going to be assembled as a man. I think he was in a cloud of dust around the feet of the horse because it looked more natural to have dust around the cloud. I guess I don't know. So I'm not sure if I've answered things or made it more clear or more if we just convoluted the issue.
I don't know that there's a definitive answer. You know, I was just curious how you saw that.
I think that I like the way you see that. Yeah, I think I'm with you on the fact that I could see them doing either one. I'm not really sure, though. I think the bottom makes more sense, like the way they assembled here, though.
Okay. Yeah. Because when you think of Tool, like the first time he showed up, the hand came out from under the ground. So it almost makes sense that they just stay under the ground, even if it's under the water. But they can't assemble under the water, so they have to actually get on something dry before they can reassemble.
That's a lot of rules I need to know. What are the rules here, Mr. Erikson? What version of AD&D are we? What are the rules?
Well, they were using some different system. I forget what it's called.
This ain't non-smoky. There's rules.
Yeah, what was the name of that system they were using? GURPS. That's what they were using.
Was it GURPS? Okay. I've always heard a lot about GURPS because did you know that Fallout 1 was based on GURPS?
I did not know that.
I think those Fallouts are the original. I think Fallouts in general is based on GURPS, I think.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Cool. All right, moving along. Culp said, "So like us, you came to this ship to get your feet dry." The female said, "And complete our task. We pursue renegade kin." Culp said, "If they were here, they've since left, before we arrived. You are a bonecaster." The female inclined her head and said, "Hentos Ilm of Logros Talan Imas." Culp said, "And the Logros no longer serve the Malazan Empire. Glad to see you're staying busy." Hentos Ilm asked, "Why?" Culp said, "Never mind," and looked skyward. He noted, "He's eased up some." Hentos Ilm said, "He senses us." She faced Hebrik again and said, "Your left hand is in balance. It is true. Odotarl and a power unknown to me. If the mage in the storm continues to grow in power, the Odotarl shall prevail, and you too shall know its madness." Hebrik said, "I want it gone from me, please." Hentos Ilm shrugged and approached Hebrik. She said, "We must destroy the one in the skies. Then we must seal the Warren's wound." Felicin said, in other words, you're probably not worth the trouble, old man. Culp said, Bonecaster, what warren is this? Hentos Ilm paused, her attention still on Hebrick. She said, Elder, Curald Emerlan. Culp said, I've heard of Curald Galain, the Tist Andi warren. Hentos Ilm said, this is Tist Edur. You surprise me, mage. You are Mianus Rashan, which is the branch of Curald Emerlan accessible to mortal humans. The warren you use is the child of this place. Culp scowled at the Bonecaster's back. He said, this makes no sense. Mianus Rashan is the warren of Shadow, of Amanus and Cotillion, and the Hounds. Hentos Ilm said, before Shadowthrone and Cotillion, there were Tist Edur. This is interesting. The last time we discussed Rashan was in Gardens of the Moon. It was the warren Hairlock used. We called it the Warren of Darkness that was accessible to humans.
Is that a Gardens of the Moonism?
Well, now that we're seeing this referred to as Mianus Rashan, maybe when they're used together, they're referring to Shadow. Like it's an aspect of it or something.
Okay.
But that might also be a Gardens of the Moonism because they called it Rashan. It didn't say Mianus Rashan. It was just Rashan is the path of darkness, which was in opposition to the path of light, which was High Thyr. You don't really hear that used much else throughout the series.
No.
It was just in Gardens of the Moon, which was written quite a bit before that.
Okay.
I thought it was an important call out here because I didn't want it to be confusing.
Yeah, and that is a good call out because it's something that people, you can get hung up on it. It's just, I like that we've brought it out here. So it's kind of like, well, I guess do with it what you will. But here's something, folks. May be confusing because it is odd that we refer to them as both Mianus and Rashan, and then here they're put together. So yeah, but I agree with you. It could be the fact that maybe together it could be in the shadow. The balance of both of them creates a shadow.
Well, the balance of light and dark creates a shadow. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay.
I guess the balance may not be the correct term, but anyhow.
The interplay.
Yeah, make me sound good. There you go.
All right. I read your mind. Hentos Ilm reached toward Hebrick and said, I would touch you. Hebrick said, be my guest. Felicin watched her place the palm of one hand against Hebrick's chest. After a moment, she stepped back and turned away as if dismissing him. She addressed the bare-furred Talani Mass who'd spoken earlier. She said, you are clanless, Lagana Breed. Lagana Breed said, I am clanless. Hentos Ilm pointed at Culp and said, Mage, do nothing. Hebrick said, wait, what did you sense in me? Hentos Ilm said, you are shorn from your god, though he continues to make use of you. I see no other purpose in your existence. Felicin bit back a nasty comment. She thought, not this one. She could see Hebrick's shoulders slowly sag, as if some vital essence had been pulled from his chest. He'd clung hard to something, and the Bonecaster had just pronounced it dead. Felicin thought, I'm running out of things to wound in him. Maybe that'll keep me from trying. At least she's thinking of the possibility of not being nasty.
Oh, I know it. I hope this is a sign of growth.
Yeah. Well, I mean, she's still acting nasty sometimes. At least she's thinking about not acting nasty,
Right. Hey, that's a step.
Hentos Ilm tilted her head back, then began to dissolve, the dust of her being spinning in place. A moment later, it spiraled upward, swiftly vanishing in the low clouds boiling overhead. Lightning cracked. Crying out, Felicin fell to her knees. The others suffered in like manner, with the exception of the remaining Talani Mass, who stood in motionless indifference. The Salanda bucked. The mud-smeared pyramid of heads around the main mast collapsed. Heads tumbled and bounced heavily on the deck. I bet that made a terrible noise as they were rolling around.
Oh yeah. But is it worse than the bone whistle chorus of the damned sound, or is it just simply louder?
No, that chorus of the damned sound is the sound of infinite pain coming out through this whistle, condensed through this whistle,
Yes.
This is just a gross rolling of a head.
Right. Oh, okay. Yeah.
Well, it's a bunch of heads, but the point is, at worst, it sounds like a coconut rolling around. You know what I mean? I definitely take the bone whistle as being the worst of the two.
Okay.
The Talani Mass spun at that, weapons suddenly out. Thunder bellowed in the roiling storm clouds. The air shivered again. Lagana Breed reached down and lifted one head by its long black hair. It was Tist Andi, a woman. He said, she still lives, revealing a muted hint of surprise. He went on. Curald Emerlan, The sorcery has locked their souls to their flesh. A faint shriek bounced down through the clouds, a sound filled with despair and jarring release. The clouds spilled out in every direction, tearing into thin wisps. A pale amber sky burned through. The storm was gone, and so too was the mad sorcerer. Felicin ducked as something winged past her, leaving in its wake a musty, dead smell. When she looked up, Hentos Ilm stood once again on the main deck, facing Lagana Breed. Neither moved, suggesting a silent conversation was underway. Beside Felicin, Colt breathed Hood's breath. She glanced over. He was staring into the sky, his face pale. She followed his gaze. A vast black lesion rimmed in fiery red and as large as a full moon marred the amber sky. Whatever leaked from it seemed to steal into Felicin through her eyes, as if the act of simply seeing it was capable of transmitting an infection, a disease that would spread through her flesh, like the poison of a blood fly. A small whimper escaped her throat, and she desperately pulled her eyes away. Do you think this is describing what it would be like to look at chaos?
I think so. I think it's the only thing we'd have to fear is something like this destroying, if they're worried about it hurting something. I think the only thing we're worried about hurting warrens seems to be chaos.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I seem to remember them mentioning that if you rip the holes in the walls of the warrens, that the chaos is going to start coming in. So when they're describing this red stuff coming through and it's making Felicin sick just by looking at it, that's what I interpret it as.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
Culp still stared. His face grew wider. His mouth hung listlessly. Felicin nudged him and yelled, "Culp!" He did not respond. She struck him. Gessler was suddenly beside them, wrapping an arm around Culp's eyes. He yelled, "Damn it, mage, snap out of it!" Culp struggled, then relaxed. Felicin saw him nod and said, "Let him go now," to Gessler. As soon as Gessler relinquished his hold, Culp rounded on Hentos Ilm. His voice was a shaken rasp as he said, "That's the wound you mentioned, isn't it? It's spreading. I can feel it, like a cancer." Hentos Ilm said, "A soul must bridge it." Lagana Breed was on the move. All eyes followed him as he strode to the stern castle steps, ascended and stood before Stormy, who did not recoil. Stormy gave him a sickly grin and muttered, "Well, this is as close as I've ever been. Once is enough." Lagana Breed raised his gray flint sword. Gessler growled, "Hold it. If you need a soul to stop her that wound, use mine." Lagana Breed's head pivoted. Gessler's jaw clenched. He nodded. That's brave of him to offer himself up like that.
Yes, and this is what I was going to earlier. These guys aren't bridge burners, but some of my favorite non-bridge burner humans, due to their insane pig-headed loyalty and crazy offerings of sacrifice that they would volunteer themselves, kind of like this. That's why they stand up so high, in my opinion.
Yeah, he's throwing himself out there to save Stormy in this case.
Is it Stormy he's trying to save? Okay.
The way I look at this situation is Lagana Breed just strolled up to Stormy, gets his sword out, and is holding him. So it makes it sound like they're going to kill Stormy to seal this breach. And Gessler's like, "Hey, if you need to take somebody, you take me."
Oh, I thought that's when he's going to give him his sword.
Well, that's what we know is about to happen, but Gessler doesn't know that.
No, that's true, yeah.
So Gessler's throwing himself out there. He's like, hey, you need to take somebody, you take me instead.
Oh, okay. Well, that's still cool.
It is still cool, yeah.
Take him, take me instead of him. That's band of brothers here. The bond of brotherhood with the band of brothers.
I guess that's the important distinction between these really storied leaders and some of the ones that get stabbed in the back is the ones that people really look up to are the kinds that sacrifice for their men.
Yeah, that's something else. Very, very admirable quality.
Yeah. Hentos Ilm pronounced insufficient. Lagana Breed faced Stormy again and rumbled, "I am the last of my clan. Le'eche Shane shall end. This weapon is our memory. Carry it, mortal. Learn its weight. Stone ever thirst for blood." He offered Stormy the 4-foot-long sword. Face blank, Stormy accepted it. Felicin saw the muscles of his forearms stiffen as they took the weight and held it. Hentos Ilm said, "Now." Lagana Breed stepped back and collapsed in a column of dust. The column twisted, spinning in on itself. The air on all sides stirred, then swept inward, pulled to the whirling emanation. A moment later, the wind fell away and Lagana Breed was gone. The remaining Talani mass turned and lifted their gazes skyward. Felicin was never certain whether she only imagined seeing the Talani mass resume his form upon striking the heart of that wound. a tiny, seemingly insignificant splayed figure that was quickly swallowed in the inky darkness. A moment later, the wound's edges seemed to flinch. Faint waves rippled outward. Then the lesion folded in on itself. Hentos Ilm continued staring upward. Finally, she nodded. Sufficient. The wound is bridged. Stormy slowly lowered the flint sword's point until it rested on the deck. Clearly overwhelmed, Stormy thought, a beat-up old veteran, knocked down cynical, just another of the Empire's cast-offs. Insufficient, she said. Indeed. Hentos Ilm said, we shall go now. Stormy shook himself and shouted, Bonecaster! There was obvious disdain in her tone as she said, Legana Breed claimed his right. Stormy did not relent. He said, this bridging. Tell me, is it a thing of pain? Hentos Ilm's shrug was an audible grate of bones. Her only answer. Gessler warned, Stormy? But Stormy shook his head, descended to the main deck. As he approached Hentos Ilm, another Talani mess stepped forward to block him. Gessler snapped, Soldier, stand off! But Stormy only moved back to clear space as he raised the flint sword. The Talani mass facing him closed again, the motion a blur. One arm shooting out, the hand closing on Stormy's neck. Cursing, Gessler pushed past Felicin. His own hand found the sword's grip at his side. Gessler slowed when it became obvious that the Talani mass was simply holding Stormy, and Stormy himself had gone perfectly still. Quiet words slipped between them. Then the undead warrior released his grip and stepped back. Stormy's anger had vanished. Something in the set of his shoulders reminded Felicin of Heberick. All 5 Talani mass began to dissolve. Culp rushed forward and shouted, Wait! How in Hood's name do we get out of here? It was too late. The creatures were gone. Gessler rounded on Stormy and demanded, What did that bastard tell you? Stormy's eyes were wet, shocking Felicin as he turned to Gessler. Gessler whispered, Stormy. Stormy muttered, He said there was great pain. I asked, How long? He said, Forever. The wound heals around him, you see. She couldn't command, you see. Not for something like that. He volunteered. Stormy's throat closed up then. He spun away, bolted through the gangway and out of sight. From the forecastle, Heberick said, Clanless, as good as useless, existence without meaning. Man, I'll tell you what, reading Stormy describe this sacrifice, it makes me tear up, like big time. You know, the magnitude of an eternity of suffering, taken on by choice, simply to have a purpose, is beyond comprehension for me.
Oh, and I agree. That's a terrible fate, but it always gets to me too, because he volunteers, man. It's a heck of a thing.
And this is one of those scenarios where in some of the interviews that I've listened to Erikson talking about these really old individuals that he writes, he says he doesn't really try to get into their heads too much. Like, how do you get in the head of something that's 300,000 years old that is the last of its kind, right? You can't really even begin to comprehend what that individual's thinking, especially with us, with our short lives.
Yeah, I get that, because how do you write that? You don't, and that's why he writes them so well. I think he doesn't. He lets us just think what we think about these things. He doesn't usually do a whole lot about them, and that's very fascinating.
Yeah. Gessler kicked one of the severed heads across the deck. He growled, "Who still wants to live forever?" Then spat. Truth spoke, his voice quavering. He asked, "Didn't anybody else see? The Bonecaster didn't. I'm sure of it. She didn't." Gessler demanded, "What are you on about, lad?" Truth said, "That Talani mess. He tied it to his belt, by the hair. His bear cloak hid it." Gessler asked, "What?" Truth said, "He took one of the heads. Didn't anybody else see?" Heberick was the first to react. With a wild grin, he leapt down to the main deck, making for the galley. Even as he plunged through the doorway, Culp was clambering down to the first ore deck. He disappeared from view. Minutes passed. Gessler, still frowning, went to join Stormy and Heberick. Culp returned and said, "One of them's dead as a post." Does this mean that Legana Breed used the head to seal the wound and didn't sacrifice himself? Because that would be dark.
That would be kind of dark, but I don't know if it's necessarily dark. If one of these heads was sufficient, they're not going to be able to be whole again. Apparently, they're just stuck. But putting this suffering on them is brutal and dark. But
that's what I'm thinking of, right? The suffering that you're forcing on somebody.
Yeah.
If that is the case, I was just tearing up thinking about this guy's sacrifice, and now I'm thinking, man, that's pretty dirty.
Yeah.
Forcing some other soul to seal this up.
Yeah. Psych. It's
Yeah.
got you psyched out.
Playing with my emotions like that.
I know it. How dare you? Again, why he's such a good writer, folks.
Oh, yeah.
He makes me feel like this.
Felicin thought to ask him what it all meant, but a sudden exhaustion swept the impulse away. She looked around until she saw Bodden, who was at the prow, his back to everything, to everyone. She wondered at his indifference, lack of imagination, she concluded after a moment. The thought bringing a sneer to her lips, she made her way to him. She asked, "All too much for you, eh, Bodden?" Bodden said, "Talani were never nothing but trouble. Always two sides to whatever they did. Maybe more than two, maybe hundreds." Felicin said, "A thug with opinions." Bodden said, "You set your every notion in stone, lass. No wonder people always surprise you." Felicin said, "Surprise? I'm way past surprise, thug. We're in something, every one of us. There's more to come, so you can forget about thinking of a way out. There isn't one." Bodden grunted. "Wise words for a change." Felicin said, "Don't soften up on me. I'm just too tired to be cruel. Give me a few hours sleep and I'll be back to my old self." Bodden said, "Planning ways to murder me, you mean?" She said, "Keeps me amused." He was silent a long moment, eyes on the meaningless horizon ahead. Then he turned to her and asked, "You ever think that maybe what you are is what's trapping you inside whatever it is you're trapped inside?" She blinked and said, "I'm not following you, Bodden." He smiled and said, "Oh yes, you are, lass." And thus the chapter ends.
Good chapter.
Another great chapter. Yes.
Another great chapter.
For standout moments, hearing Kalam's perspective on fighting being the last option for a man, I appreciated how his view is similar to Whiskey Jack's.
Yes, and I know we have shared a similar outlook in the past when we talked about Whiskey Jack, and I appreciate that. You're not trying to glorify the violence and come into this lifestyle for that.
Mm-hmm. Seeing the Talan Imass assemble from the mud into individuals, that's a really cool ability.
Yes, they always fascinate me. The Talan always get to me in this series. There's so many good ones. There's so many weird ones, and there's so much. They're so involved, but they're so odd.
Yeah, when Hentos Ilm also kind of turned into a storm of dust and went up and did battle with this mad sorcerer and killed him, made it look real easy. By the way.
Yeah. Just kind of went there and back.
That was wild.
I'll be right back.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I appreciated the introduction of Kurald Emrulan, the Teast Idur Elder Warren of Shadow.
Oh, yeah. I like how, again, his speed at which he gives us this information is always perfect because it's not overwhelming. I'm like you. I really enjoyed the introduction to this new realm, a new Warren, real proper intro.
Yeah, then yet another Elder Warren appears before us.
Yes. Yes. All Elder, it seems like, a lot of them.
The description of the rift that appeared when the sorcerer was defeated was something else, especially with the way it was described that Felicin was getting sick just by looking at it.
Yes. And how I also liked how Culp was apparently like hypnotized or being infected or something by it as he's staring up into it. It took somebody slapping him a couple times and then covering his eyes. I'm curious if maybe magic users may be more prone to being infected from something like that than your typical human, who would probably be infected at some point because it was bothering her. But I'm like you in the fact that I do love seeing how they came here and take care of business, shut that sorcerer down very easily, and just kind of also they plug the hole in the gap, not unlike plugging a tire.
Yeah, great.
It's just like, hey, here we go. Plop one in there, plop a soul in there. Okay, we're good to go.
Right.
Mileage may vary.
On that topic, Gessler offering himself to bridge the wound so Stormy wouldn't. That was a pretty stand-up moment for him there.
Very touching, and part of this, I also found it very touching, Stormy being handed that flint sword. This goes to pre-knowledge for people who are unaware, and I think we can say this, but knowing what we know later on, swords are so important in this world anyhow, but this flint sword from these people is so essential to their being almost. Him giving that sword to him is so cool.
Yes. Sacred item. Carry the last reminder of my clan effectively.
Yeah.
And through Stormy,
very much so,
he's going to keep their memory alive.
Yeah. So cool.
Definitely. And then learning of the enormity of Lagana Breed's sacrifice, if he did sacrifice himself.
Yes, and yes, I agree.
That idea of eternal suffering.
Because I'm curious. I'm like, if he escaped it, if he didn't doom some poor other sucker to be in there, it's like, ha, gotcha.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm either mad or I'm crying right now. So,
Right.
two ends of the spectrum.
I need to know what to do here, Mr. Erikson. Tell us what we are supposed to do.
Yeah, that's great though. That feeling, a little bit unsure,
Yeah.
But yeah, to your point, the way he's able to even make me feel that upset about something, it just is a testament to what a writer he is.
Oh, and he does it repeatedly. It's not an act. It's never incidental. It's always. I told you. I think we both agree these series has brought me to It's brought me to sniffling, but it's also just brought me to full on. I got to put the book down and wipe the snot running down my face because I'm just bawling.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. It's like, how does he do that? It's because he's a good writer. That's how he does it.
Dude, there's a couple things I'm dreading having to talk through later. I'm like, I don't know how I'm going to be able to read this. It's going to be like, this book has a couple moments. I'm thinking of something in particular. It'll be several years from now that it's just like, it reminds me of my 6th grade English teacher reading Where the Red Fern Grows, where she just like, I'm hoping it doesn't end up being like this, where she just breaks down because she can't keep reading the book in class. You know what I mean? It's like,
yes, I know what you mean.
Yeah.
Oh, goodness.
Well, we'll get there when we get there.
We'll get there.
All right, great job tonight, Billy.
Hey, great episode, man. Great episode.
You got any final thoughts before we drop off here?
Just amazing. Again, amazing chapter with it's total escalation, man. Total escalation continues.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and it will continue to continue.
Yeah, it just grows. It grows.
Yes. All right. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next week.
Yeah, thanks, everybody. See y'all next week.
We thank you all for joining us today.
Again, we really like to thank you for taking the time to be with us, and we've had a really great time talking about the topic today.
If you would like to support our show, you can find us at HorseFrogProductions.com, where you can find our Patreon link. Depending on the platform you're listening from, it may also be in the episode description.
And if you'd like to contact us through email, it's at contact@horsefrogproductions.com.